Hey guys, this is Allison from Allylat Creations. How are you? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. And if you get anything from my work, a connect the dot, new author to read, a new book to explore, a moment, please consider supporting my work. All the links will be in the description box below the video. Blavatsky. Because, butchering every word in there is just what I would like to do. But I really love this book, and we're going to get to it. I ended off on stanza 5, and we're going to start on stanza 6, continuing on with 7. It's confusing, pretty much. But stanza 7 continued, part 6. From the firstborn, primitive, or the first man, the thread between the silent watcher and his shadow becomes more strong and radiant with every change, reincarnation. The morning sunlight has changed into noonday glory. This sentence, quote, the thread between the silent watcher and his shadow man becomes stronger, end quote, with every reincarnation is another psychological mystery that will find its explanation in book 2. For the present, it will suffice to say that the watcher and his shadows, the latter, numbering as many as there are reincarnations for the monad, are one. The watcher, or the divine prototype, is at the upper rung of the ladder of being, the shadow at the lower. Withal, the monad of every living being, unless his moral turpitude breaks the connection and runs loose and astray into the lunar path, to use the occult expression, is an individual Dayan Kohan, distinct from others, a kind of spiritual individuality of its own during one special Manvarata. Its primary, the spirit Atman, is one, of course, with Paramanta, Patma, the one universal spirit, but the vehicle Vahan is enshrined in the Buddhai, is part and parcel of the Dayan Kohanic essence. And it is in this that lies the mystery of the ubiquity, which was discussed a few pages back. Quote, my Father that is in heaven and I are one, end quote, says the Christian scripture. In this way, at any rate, it is the faithful echo of the esoteric tenet. 7, stanza 7, part 7. This is why thy present wheel and said the flame to the eternal spark. Thou art myself, my image and my shadow. I have clothed myself in thee, and thou art my Vahan, vehicle to the day. Be with us when thou shalt be re-become myself and others, thyself and me. Then the builders, having donned their first clothing, descended on radiant earth and reign over men who are themselves. The day when the spark will re-become the flame, man will emerge into the Dayan Kohan, myself and others, thyself and me. As the stanza has it, means this: in Paranirvana, that Pralaya will have reduced not only material and psychical bodies, but even the spiritual ego, to their original principle. The past, present, and even future humanities, like all things, will be one and the same. Everything will have re-entered the great breath. In other words, everything will be merged in Brahma, or the divine unity. Is this annihilation as some think, or atheism as other critics, the worshippers of a personal deity and non-believers, in the unphilosophical paradise are inclined to suppose? Neither. It is worse than useless to return to the question of implied atheism in that which is spirituality of the most refined character. To see in nirvana annihilation amounts to saying of a man plunged into a sound, dreamless sleep, one that leaves no impression on the physical memory and brain, because the sleeper, high self, is in its original state of absolute consciousness during these hours, that he too is annihilated. The latter smile answers only to one side of the question, the most material, since reabsorption is by no means such a dreamless sleep, but on the contrary, absolute existence and unconditioned unity or a state is described, which human language is absolutely and hopelessly inadequate. The only approach to anything like a comprehensive conception of it can be attempted solely in the panoramic visions of the soul through spiritual ideations of the divine monad. Nor is the individuality, nor even the essence of the personality, if any be left behind, lost because reabsorbed. For however limitless from a human standpoint, the paranavanic state, it has yet a limit in eternity. Once reached, the same monad will reemerge therefrom as a still higher being on a far higher plane to recommence its cycle of perfected activity. The human mind cannot, in its present stage of development, transcend, scarcely reach this plane of thought. It totters here on the brink of incomprehensible absoluteness and eternity. The watchers reign over men during the whole period of Satya Yuga and the smaller subsequent yugas, down to the beginning of the third root race, after which it is the patriarchs, heroes, and the manas. See Egyptian dynasties enumerated by the priests to Solon, the incarnated Dians of a lower order, or to the king Menes, and the human kings of other nations, all were recorded carefully. In the views of symbologists, the mythopoetic age is of course only regarded as a fairy tale. But since traditions and even chronicles of such dynasties of divine kings, of gods reigning over men, followed by dynasties of heroes or giants, exist in the annals of every nation, it is difficult to understand how all these people under the sun, some of whom are separated by vast oceans and belong to different hemispheres, such as the ancient Peruvians and Mexicans, as well as the Chaldeans, could have worked out the same fairy tales in the same order of events. However, as the Secret Doctrine teaches, history, which far being esoteric and traditional, is nonetheless more reliable than profane history. We are entitled to our beliefs as anyone else, whether religionist or skeptic. And that doctrine says that the Daihan Buddhas of the two higher groups, namely the Watchers or the Architects, furnish the many and various races with divine kings and leaders. It is the latter who taught humanity their arts and sciences, and the former who revealed to the incarnated mind monads that had just shaken off their vehicles of the lower kingdoms, and who had therefore lost every recollection of their divine origin, the great spiritual truths of the transcendental worlds. See Book 2, Divine Dynasties. I'm going to put a pause there. You can also see this in Owaspy. If you read that, a lot of what this book is saying is layering in the idea of what the Secret Doctrine is portraying here. The upper and the lower kingdoms, all the teachings and the nurseries and the faculties and the facilities and all these things that show up in Owaspy are also here. So if you want to correlate two books, these two books correlate with each other immensely. So if you haven't watched my Owaspy series, it's a little, it's not in order per se, but I'm tackling that and it's amazing. So go watch, because that book will make this book make sense. Thus, as expressed in the stanza, the Watchers descend on earth and reign over men who are themselves the reigning kings, had finished their cycle on earth and other worlds in the preceding rounds. In the future Manvaratas, they will have risen higher systems than our planetary world, and it is the elect of our humanity, the pioneers on the hard and difficult path of progress, who will take the places of their predecessors. The next great Mahabharata will witness the men of our own life cycle becoming the instructors and guides of a mankind whose monads may now yet be imprisoned and semi-conscious in the most intellectual of the animal kingdom, whether their lower principles will be animating perhaps the highest specimens of the vegetable world. And we're here now, guys. This proceed the cycles of the septenary evolution in septennial nature, the spiritual or divine, the psychic and semi-divine, the intellectual, passional, the instinctual or cognital, the semi-corporeal, and the purely material and physical natures. All these evolve and progress. Guys, I don't know if I can get this word out without my teeth flying. Cyclically passing from one into another in a double centrifugal and centripetal way, one in their ultimate essence, seven in their aspects. The lowest, of course, is the one depending upon and subservient to our five physical senses. Thus far, for individual, human, sentient, animal, and vegetable lives, each with the microcosms of its higher macrocosm. The same for the universe, which manifests periodically for purposes of the collective progress, the countless lives, the outbreathings of the one life, in order that through the ever becoming, every cosmic atom in this infinity of the universe, passing from the formless and intangible through the mixed nature of the semi-terrestrial down to matter in full generation, and then back again, rescending at every new period, higher and nearer the final goal, that each atom may reach through individual merits and efforts, that plane where it re-becomes the one unconditional all. But between the Alpha and the Omega, there is the weary road, hedged in by thorns, that goes down first, the winds uphill all the way. Yes, to the very end. Starting upon the long journey immaculate, descending more and more into sinful matter, and having connected himself with every atom is manifested space, the pilgrim, having struggled through and suffered in every form of life and being, is only at the bottom of the valley of matter, and half through this cycle, when he has identified himself with collective humanity. Thus he has made in his own image, in order to progress upwards and homewards, the God has now to ascend the weary uphill path of the Goliath of life. It is the martyrdom of self-consciousness existence. Like this for Karaman, he has to sacrifice himself to himself in order to redeem all creatures, to resurrect from many into the one life. Then he ascends into the heaven indeed, where plunged into the incomprehensible absolute being of bliss of para nirvana, he reigns unconditionally, and whence he will redescend again at the next coming, which one portion of humanity expects in its dead letter sense as the second advent, and the other as the last Alki avatar. Alki. Someone help me out with this book, with these pronunciations, not because it's projection. Summing up, quote, the history of creation in this world from its beginning up to the present time is composed of 7 chapters. The 7th chapter is not yet written. T. Subaru, the Theosophist, 1881. The first of these 7 chapters have been attempted and now finished. However incomplete and feeble as the exposition, it is at any rate an approximation using the word in a mathematical sense to that which is the oldest basis for the subsequent cosmogonies. The attempt to render in a European tongue the grand panorama of the ever-periodical reoccurring law impressed upon the plastic minds of the first race endowed with consciousness by those who reflect the same from the universal mind is daring, for no human language, save the Sanskrit, which is that of the gods, can do so with any degree of adequacy. For the failures in this work must be forgiven for the sake of the motive. As a whole, neither the foregoing nor what follows can be found in full anywhere. It is not taught in any of the 6 Indian schools of philosophy, for it pertains to their synthesis, the 7th, which is the occult doctrine. It is not traced on any crumbling papyrus of Egypt, nor is it any longer graven as a Syrian title or granite wall. The books of the Vedanta, the last word of the human knowledge, give out but the metaphysical aspect of the word cosmogony, and their priceless thesaurus, the Upanishads. The Upanishad being a compound word meaning the conquest of ignorance by the revelation of secret spiritual knowledge, required now the additional possession of the master key to enable the student to get at their full meaning. The reason for this I venture to state here, as I learned from it from a master. The name Upanishads is usually translated esoteric doctrine. These treatises form part of the Suridid, or revealed knowledge, revelation in short, and are generally attached to the Brahma portion of the Vedas as their 3rd division. There are over 150 Upanishads enumerated by and known to Orientalists, who credit the oldest with being written probably about 600 years BC. But of genuine text, there does not exist a 5th of the number. The Upanishads are to the Vedas what the Kabbalah is to the Jewish Bible. They treat of and expound the secret and mystic meaning of the Vedic texts. They speak of the origin of the universe, the nature of deity, and the spirit and soul, as also the metaphysical connection of mind and matter. In a few words, they contain the beginning and the end of the human knowledge, but they have now ceased to reveal it since the day of the Buddha. If it were otherwise, the Upanishads could not be called esoteric, since they are now openly attached to the secret Brahmanical books, which have in our present age become accessible even to the Malekshas, or outcasts, and the European Orientalists. One thing in them, and this is the Upanishads, invariably and constantly points to the ancient origin and proves that they were written in some of their portions before the caste system became the tyrannical institution which it is, and that half of their contents have been eliminated, while some of them were rewritten and abridged. The great teachers of the higher knowledge and the Brahmins are continually represented as going to Kshatriya, military caste, kings to become their pupils. As Cowell permanently remarks, the Upanishads breathe in entirely different spirit from other Brahmanical workings and writings. A freedom of thought unknown in any earlier work except in the Rig Veda hymns themselves. The second fact is explained by a traditional recorded in one of the MSS on Buddha's life. It says that the Upanishads were originally attached to their Brahmans after the beginning of the reform, which led to the exclusiveness of the present caste system among the Brahmins, a few centuries after the invasion of India by the twice born. They were complete in those days and were used for the instruction of the chelas who were preparing for their initiation. This lasted so long as the Vedas and the Brahmins reminded in the sole and exclusive keeping of the temple Brahmins, while no one else had the right to study or even read them outside of the sacred caste. Then came Gautama, the prince of Kalpa-Vustu, after learning the whole of the Brahmanical wisdom of the Rapasa, or the Upanishads, and finding that the teachings differed little, if at all, and those of the teachers of life inhabiting the snowy ranges of the Himalaya. The disciple of the Brahmins, feeling indignant because of the sacred wisdom, was thus withheld from all the Brahmins, determined to save the world by popularizing it. Then it was that the Brahmins, seeing that their sacred knowledge and occult wisdom was falling into the hands of the Malkikas, I am not saying that right, I am sorry, abridged the text of the Upanishads, originally containing thrice the matter of the Vedas and the Brahmins together, without altering, however, one word of the text. They simply detached from the MSS the most important portions containing the last word of the mystery of being. The key to the Brahmanical secret code remained henceforth with the initiates alone, and the Brahmins were thus in a position to publicly deny the correctness of Buddhist teachings by appealing to their Upanishads' silence forever on the chief questions. Such is the esoteric tradition beyond the Himalayas. Suri Santkaraya, the greatest initiate living in the historical ages, wrote many of a Bosha on the Upanishads, but his original treatise, as they are reasons to suppose, have not yet fallen into the hands of the Philistines, for they are too jealously preserved in his monasteries, mathmas, and there are still weightier reasons to believe that the priceless Vishayas, commentaries on the esoteric doctrine of the Brahmins, by their greatest expounder, will remain for ages yet a dead letter to most of the Hindus, except the Smartava Brahmins. This sect, founded by Sankaracharya, this is bad, sorry, which is very powerful in southern India, is now almost the only one to produce students who have preserved sufficient knowledge to comprehend the dead letter of the Brahmas. The reason of this is that they alone, I am informed, have occasionally read initiates at their head in their mathmas, as for instance, in the Sarangaguri in the Western Ghats of Mysore. On the other hand, there is no sect in the desperately exclusive caste of the Brahmins, more exclusive than in the Smartvaya, and the reticence of its followers to say that they may know of the occult sciences and the esoteric doctrine is only equaled by their pride and learning. Therefore, the writer of the present statement must be prepared beforehand to meet with great opposition and even the denial of such statements as are brought forward in this work. Not that any claim is to infallibility or to perfect correctness in every detail of all that which is herein said was ever put forward. Facts are there, and they can hardly be denied. But owing to the intrinsic difficulties of the subjects treated and the almost insurmountable limitations of English tongue, as of all other European languages, to express certain ideas, it is more than probable that the writer has failed to present the explanations in the best and in the clearest form, yet all that could be done was done under every adverse circumstance, and this is the utmost that we can be expected at any writer. Let us recapitulate and show by the vastness of the subjects expounded how difficult, if not impossible, it is to do them full justice. The secret doctrine is the accumulated wisdom of the ages, and its cosmogony alone is the most stupendous and elaborate system, even the exotericism of the Puranas. But such is the mysterious power of occult symbolism that the fact which have actually occupied countless generations of initiated seers and prophets to marshal, to set down and explain in the bewildering series of evolutionary progress are all recorded on a few pages of geometrical signs and glyphs. The flashing gaze of those seers have penetrated into the very kernel of matter and recorded the soul of things there were an extraordinary, profound, however learned, would have perceived but the eternal work of form. But modern science believes it is not in the soul of things, and hence will reject the whole system of ancient cosmogony. It is useless to say that the system in question is no fancy of one or several isolated individuals, that in the uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers, those respective experiences were made to test and to verify the traditions passed orally by one early race to another of the teachings of the higher and exalted beings who watch over the childhood of humanity, that for long ages the wise men of the fifth race of the stock, saved and rescued from the last cataclysm and shifting of continents, had passed their lives in learning and not teaching. How did they do so? It is answered by checking, testing, verifying in every department of nature and traditions of old by the independent visions of great adepts, men who have developed a perfect, they're perfected in their physical, mental, psychic, and spiritual organizations to the utmost possible degree. No vision of one adept was accepted till it was checked and confirmed by the vision so obtained to stand as independent evidence of other adepts by centuries of experience. The fundamental law in the system, the central point from which all emerged, around and toward which all gravitates, and upon which is hung the philosophy of the rest, is the one homogeneous divine substance principle, the one radical cause. Quote, some few whose lamps shone brighter have been led from cause to nature's secret head, and found the one first principle must be, end quote. It is called substance principle, for it becomes substance on the plane of the manifested universe, an illusion, while it remains a principle in the beginningless and endless abstract visible and invisible space. It is the omnipresent reality, impersonal, because it contains all and everything. Its impersonality is the fundamental conception of the system. It is latent in every atom in the universe and is the universe itself. See the chapters on symbolism, primordial substance, and divine thought. The universe is the periodical manifestation of the unknown absolute essence. To call it essence, however, is to sin against the very spirit of the philosophy. For though the noun may be derived in this case from the very verb esse, to be, yet it cannot be identified with a being of any kind that can be conceived by human intellect. It is best described as neither spirit nor matter, but both. Para Brahman and Mulpa Mukhaprati are one in reality, yet two in the universal conception of the manifested, even in the conception of the one logos, its first manifestation, to which, as the able lecturer in the notes on the Bhagavad Gita shows, it appears from the objective standpoint of the one logos as Mukhaprati and not a Para Brahman, as it veil and not the reality hidden behind, which is unconditioned and absolute. The universe is called with everything in it Maya, because it all is temporary therein, from the ephemeral life of a firefly to that of the sun, compared to the eternal immutability of the one and the changelessness of that principle. The universe with its evanescence, ever-changing forms, must be necessarily, in the mind of the philosopher, no better than the will-o'-wisp, yet the universe is real enough to the conscious beings in it, which are as unreal as it is itself. Everything in the universe throughout all the kingdoms is conscious, endowed with a consciousness of its own kind on its own plane of perception. We men must remember that because we do not perceive any signs which we can recognize of consciousness, say in stones, we have no right to say that no consciousness exists there. There is no such thing as either dead or blind matter, as there is no blind or unconscious law. These find no place among the conception of occult philosophy. The later never stops to surface appearances, and for it noumenal and essences have more reality than their objective counterparts. It resembles therein the medieval nominalists, for whom it was universals that were the realities and particulars which existed only in the name of human fancy. The universe is worked and guided from within outwards. As above, so it is below. As in heaven, so on earth. And man, the microcosm and the miniature copy of the macrocosm, is the living witness to the universal law and to the mode of its action. We see that every external notion, act, gesture, whether voluntary or mechanical, organic or mental, is produced and preceded by internal feeling or emotion, will or volition, and thought or mind, as no outward motion or change when normal is in man's external body can take place unless provoked by an inward impulse given through one of the three functions named as with the eternal and manifested universe. The whole cosmos is guided, controlled, and animated by almost endless series of hierarchies of sentient beings, each having a mission to perform, and who, whether we give to them one name or another, and call the Daihan Kohans or angels, are messengers in the same sense, only that they are agents of karmic and cosmic laws. They infinitively, in their respective degrees of consciousness and intelligence, and call them all pure spirits without any of the earthly alloy, which time is wont to prey upon, is only to indulge in potential fancy. For each of these beings either was or prepares to become a man, if not in the present, then in a past or coming cycle of Manavrata. They are perfected when not incipient man and differ morally from the terrestrial human beings on their higher, less material spheres, only in that they are devoid of the feeling of personality and of the human emotional nature, two purely earthly characteristics. The former or the perfected have become free from these feelings because they have no longer fleshly bodies or even numbing weight on the soul, and the pure spiritual element being left untrammeled and more free. They are less influenced by Maya than man can ever be, unless he is an adept who keeps his two personalities, the spiritual and the physical, entirely separated. The incipient monads have never had terrestrial bodies, yet can have no sense of personality or egoism. That which is meant by personality being a limitation and a relation, or as defined by Coleridge, individually existing in itself, but with the nature of as a ground. The term cannot, of course, be applied to non-human entities, but as a fact insists upon the generations of spheres. None of these beings, high or low, have ever individually or personally as separate entities. They have no individuality in the sense in which a man says, I am myself and no one else. In other words, they are conscious of no such distinct separateness as men and things have on earth. Individuality is the characteristic of their respective hierarchies, not of their units. And these characteristics vary only with the degree of the plane in which those hierarchies belong. The nearer to the region of homogeny and the one divine, the pure and the less accentuated the individuality and hierarchy. They are finite in all respects, with the exception of their higher principles, the immortal sparks reflecting the universal divine flame, individualized and separated only on the spheres of illusion by a differentiation as elusive as the rest. They are living oneness because they are the streams projected on the cosmic screen of the illusion from the absolute life. Beings in whom life cannot become extinct before the fire of ignorance is extinct, and those who sense the lives having sprung into being under the quickening influence of the uncreated beam, the reflection of the great central sun that radiates on the shores of the river of life. It is in the inner principle in them which belongs to the waters of immortality, while it differentiated clothing is a perishable of man's body. Therefore, Jung was right in saying that angels are men of superior kind, And no more, they are neither ministering nor protecting angels, nor are they harbingers of the Most High, still less the messengers of wrath of any god, such as men's fancy has created. To appeal to their protection is as foolish as to believe that their sympathy may be secured by any kind of appropriation, for there are as much as man himself and the slaves and creatures of immutable karmic and cosmic law. The reason for it is evident. Having no elements of personality in their essence, they have no personal qualities, such as attributed by men in their esoteric religions. To their anthropomorphic God, a jealous and elusive God who rejoices and feels wrathful, is pleased with sacrifice, and is more despotic in his vanity than in the finite foolish man. Man, as shown in Book 2, being a compound of the essences of all these celestial hierarchies, may succeed in making himself, as such, superior in one sense to a hierarchy or class, or even combination of them. Man can either proprietate or command the devas, it is said, but by paralyzing his own personality and arriving thereby at the full knowledge of the non-separateness of his higher self, from the one absolute self, man can, even during his terrestrial life, become as one of us. Thus it is by eating of the fruit of knowledge, which dispels ignorance, that man becomes like one of the Elohim or the Dians, and one of their plane. The spirit of solidarity and perfect harmony, which reigns in every hierarchy, must extend over him and protect him in every particular. The chief difficulty which prevents men of science from believing in divine as well as in nature spirits in their materialism, the main impediment before the spiritualist which hinders him from believing in the same while preserving a blind belief in the spirits of the departed, is the general ignorance of all except some occultists and Kabbalists about the true essence and nature of matter. It is on the acceptance or rejection of the theory of the unity of all in nature in its ultimate essence that mainly rests the belief of unbelief in the existence around us of other conscious beings besides the spirit of the dead. Truth. It is on the right comprehension of the primeval evolution of spirit matter and its real essence that the student has to depend for the further elucidation in his mind of the occult cosmogony, and is for only sure clue which can guide his subsequent studies. In the sober truth, as just shown, every spirit so-called is either a disembodied or a future man, as from the highest archangel, Dayan Kohan, down to the last conscious builder, the inferior class of spiritual entities. All such are men, having lived eons ago in other Manavatras on this or other spheres. So the inferior semi-intelligent and non-intelligent elementals are all future men. The fact alone that a spirit is endowed with the intelligence is a proof to the occultist that the being must have been a man and acquired his knowledge and intelligence throughout the human cycle. There is but one indivisible and absolute omniscience and intelligence in the universe, and this thrills without every atom and infinitesimal point of the whole finite cosmos, which hath no bounds and which people call space, considered independently of anything contained in it. But the first differentiation of reflection is the manifested world is purely spiritual, and the beings generated in it are not endowed with the consciousness that has any relation to one we can conceive of. They can have no human consciousness or intelligence before they have any acquired such personality and individuality. They may be a mystery, yet it is a fact that esoteric philosophy, and very apparent one too. The whole order of nature evinces a progressive march towards a higher life. There is a design in the action of the seemingly blindest forces. The whole process of evolution, which is endless adaptations, is a proof of this. the immutable laws that weed out the weak and feeble species to make room for the strong and which endure the survival of the fittest, though so cruel in their immediate action, all are working toward the grand end. The very fact that adaptations do occur, that the fittest do survive in the struggle for existence, shows what is called unconscious nature is in reality an aggregate of forces manipulated by semi-intelligent beings, elementals guided by higher planetary spirits, Daihan Kohans, whose collective aggregate forms the manifested verbatim of the unmanifested logos and constitutes at one and the same time the mind of the universe and its immutable law. Three distinct representation of the universe in its three distinct aspects are impressed upon thought by the esoteric philosophy, the pre-existing evolved from the ever-existing, and the phenomenal, the world of illusion, the reflection and shadow thereof. During the great mystery and drama of the life known as Manavrata, real cosmos is like the object placed behind the white screen upon which are thrown the Chinese shadows pulled forth by the magic lantern. The actual figures and things remain invisible, while the wires of evolution are pulled by the unseen hands, and men and things are thus but the reflections on the white field of the realities behind the snares of Mahamaya, or the great illusion. This was taught in every philosophy and every religion, ante as well as post-Diluvian, in India and Chaldea, by the Chinese as by the great Grecian sages. In the former countries, these three universes were allegorized in exoteric teachings by the three triads emanating from the central eternal germ and following with it supreme unity, the initial, the manifested, and the creative triad, or the three in one. The last is but the symbol in its concrete expression of the first ideal too. Hence, esoteric philosophy passes over the necessaryism of the purely metaphysical conception and calls the first one only the ever existing. This is the view of every one of the six great schools of Indian philosophy, the six principles of that unit body of wisdom, of which the gnosis, the hidden knowledge, is the seventh. The writer hopes that superficially handed as may be the comments on the 7 stanzas, enough has been given in the cosmogonic portion of the work to show archaic teaching to be more scientific in the modern sense of the word on their very face than any other ancient scriptures left to be regarded and judged on their esoteric aspect. Since, however, as confessed before, the work withholds far more than it gives out, the student is invited to use his own intuitions. Our chief care is to elucidate that which has already been given out, and to our regret, very incorrectly at times, to supplement the knowledge hinted at whenever and wherever possible by additional matter, and to bulwark our doctrines against the too strong attacks of modern sanctuarism, and more especially against those of our latter-day materialism, very often miscalled science, whereas in reality the words scientists and soilitists ought alone to bear the responsibility for many illogical theories offered to the world. In its great ignorance, the public, while blindly accepting everything that emanates from authorities and feeling it to be its very duty to regard every dictum coming from a man of science as proven fact, the public will say it's taught to scoff anything brought forward from heathen sources. Therefore, as materialistic scientists can be fought solely with their own weapons, those of controversy and argument, as addendum is added to every book contrasting our respective views and showing how even great authorities may often err. Didn't we just go through this, like in our society right now? We believe that this can be done effectively by showing the weak points of our opponents and by proving their too frequent sophisms made to pass for scientific data to be incorrect. We hold the Hermes and his wisdom in its universal character, they to the Aristotle as against intuition and the experience of the ages. Fancying the truth is the elusive property of the Western world. Hence the disagreement, as Hermes says, knowledge differs much from sense, for sense is of things that surmount it, but knowledge is the end of sense, of the illusion of our physical brain and its intellect, thus emphasizing the contrast between the laboriously acquired knowledge of the senses and mind and the intuitive omniscience of the spiritual divine soul, Buddha. Whatever may be the destiny of these actual writings in a remote future, we hope to have proven so far the following facts. The Secret Doctrine teaches no atheism except in the Hindu sense of the word nashka, or rejection of idols, including every anthropomorphic god in the sense every occultist is a nashtika. I don't know if I said that right. It emits logos or a collective creator or the universe, a demi-ergos, in the sense implied that one speaks of the architect as the creator, or an edifice whereas the architect has never touched one stone of it, but while furnishing the plan, left all the manual labor to the masons. In our case, the plan was furnished by the ideation of the universe, and the constructive labor was left to the hosts of intellectual powers and forces. But the demiurgos is no personal deity, an imperfect extra cosmic god, but only the aggregate of the Dahan Kohans and other forces. As to the latter, there are dual in their character, being composed of, and the irrational brute energy inherent in matter, and in the intelligent soul of cosmic consciousness, which directs the guides, that energy, and which is the Dhyanic Kohanic thought reflecting the ideation of the universal mind. This results in a perpetual series of physical manifestations and moral effects on earth during Maravanic periods, the whole being subservient to karma. As that process is not always perfect, and since however many proofs it may exhibit of a guiding intelligence behind the veil, it still shows gaps and flaws and even results very often in evident failures. Therefore, neither the collective host demiurgos nor any of the working powers individually are proper subjects for divine honors or worship. All are entitled to the grateful reverence of humanity, however, and man ought to be ever striving to help the divine evolution of ideas by becoming the best of his ability as a co-worker with nature in the cyclic task. The ever unknowable and incognizable karma alone, the causeless cause of all causes, should have its shrine and altar on the holy and ever untrodden ground of our heart, invisible, intangible, unmentioned, save though the still small voice of our spiritual consciousness. Those who worship before it ought to do so in the silence and sanctified solitude of their souls, making their spirit the sole mediator between them and the universal spirit, their good actions the only priests, and their sinful intentions the only visible and objective sacrificial victims to the presence. Matter is eternal. It is the upad, the physical basis for the one infinite universal mind to build thereon its ideations. Therefore, the esotericism maintain that there is no inorganic or dead matter in nature, the distinction between the two made by science being an unfounded as it is arbitrary and devoid of reason. Whatever science may think, however, an exact science is a fickle dame, as we all know by experience. Occultism knows and teaches differently from the immoral, from Manu and Hermes down to Paracelsus and his successors. Thus Hermes, the thrice great Trismegistus, says, "Oh, my son, matter becomes. Formerly it was, for matter is the vehicle of becoming. Being in the mode of activity of the uncreated deity, having been endowed with the germs of becoming, matter, objective, is brought into birth, for the creative force fashions it according to the ideal forms. Matter not yet engendered had no form. It becomes when it is put into operation. Everything is the product of one universal creative effort. There is nothing dead in nature. Everything is organic or living, and therefore the whole world appears to be living organism. The universe was evolved out of its ideal plane, upheld through eternity in the unconsciousness of that which the Vedantins call parabum. This is practically identical with the conclusions of the highest Western philosophy, the initiate, eternal, and self-existing ideas of Plato, now reflected by von Hartmann. The unknowable of Herbert Spencer bears only a faint resemblance to the transcendental reality believed in the occultists, often appearing merely as personification of force behind phenomena, an infinite and eternal energy from which all things proceed, while the author of the philosophy of the unconscious has come in this respect only as near to a solution of the great mystery as mortal men can. Few were those, whether in ancient or medieval philosophy, who had dared to approach the subject or even hint at it. Persilius mentions it inferentially. His ideas are admirably synthesized by Dr. F. Hartman, FTS, in his Life of Persilius. All the Christian Kabbalists understand well the Eastern root idea, the active power, the perpetual motion of the great breath, only awakens cosmos at the dawn of every new period, setting into motion by means of the two contrary forces, and thus causing it to become objective as the plane of illusion. In other words, the dual motion transfers cosmos from the plane of the eternal idea into that of finite manifestation, or from the noumenal to the phenomenal plane. Everything that is, was, and will be eternally, even the countless forms which are finite and perishable only in their objective, not in their idea form. There existed as ideas in the eternity, and when they pass away will exist as reflections. Neither the form of man nor that of animal, plant, or stone has ever been created, and it is only on the plane of ours that it commenced becoming, objectivizing into the present materiality, or expanding from within outwards, from the most sublimated and supersensuous essence into the grossest appearance. Therefore, our human forms have existed in the eternity as astral or etherical prototypes, according to which models the spiritual beings or gods, whose duty it was to bring them into objective being in terrestrial life, evolved the protoplasmic forms of the future egos from their own essence. After which, when this human upad, or basic mold, was ready, the natural terrestrial forces began to work on those supersensuous molds, which contained, besides their own, the elements of all the past vegetable and future animal forms of this globe in them. Therefore, man's outward shell passed through every vegetable and animal body before it assumed the human shape, as this will be fully described in Book 2 with the commentaries thereupon. There is no need to say more here. Pause. Dolores Cannon talks about that, with her QHHT sessions. We were the rock, we were the air, we were the fire, we were the water, we were the mountain, we were the rock on the mountain, we were the sand, we were the tree, we were the animal, we were the ant, we were everything before we came into this vehicle. And in a cosmic sense, a lot of people like to claim starseed titles and where they're from. And yes, we've all emerged from different places in the galaxy, but I now starting to intuit and get from my guides that we were also everything upstairs as well, in the galactic form, in the terrestrial, extraterrestrial form. We were not only Palladian, Telosian, Arcturian, Syrian, Andromedan. We were everything until we came into this consciousness as human. So you might have more than one starseed, but your DNA is genetically molded by your parents and thus your star family. So you're connecting to your strongest potentiality in those DNA remembrances. Just putting that one out there. According to the Hermetico-Kabbalist philosophy of Paracelsus, it is Yolaster, the ancestor of the just-born protyle, introduced by Mr. Crookes in chemistry, or primordial protomateria, that evolved out of itself the cosmos. Quote, when evolution took place, the Yolaster divided itself, melted and dissolved, developing from within itself the Eidos, or chaos, called respectively Mysterium Magnum, Eludios, Libros, Major, or primordial matter. This primordial essence is of monoistic nature and manifests itself not only as virtual activity, a spiritual force, an invisible, incomprehensible, and indescribable power, but also a vital matter of which the substance of living beings consists. End quote. In the eidos of primordial matter, or the proto-illos, which is the matrix of all created things, is contained the substance from which everything is formed. It is chaos, out of which the macrocosm, and later on by evolution and division in mysteria specialia, each separate being came into an existence. All things and all elementary substances were contained in its potentia, but not in its actu, which makes the translator Dr. F. Hartman justly observe that it seems the Paracelsus anticipated the modern discovery of the potency of matter 300 years ago. This Magnus Libus, then a Yolaster or Paracelsus, is simply our old friend, father, mother within, before it appeared in space of the second and other stanzas. It is the universal matrix of cosmos personified in dual character of macro and micro, or the universe and the globe, by Aditi Paradi, the spiritual and the physical nature. For we find it explained in Paracelsus that the Magnus Limbius is the nursery out of which all creatures have grown, in the same sense as the tree grows out of the small seed, which, with the difference, however, that the great limbus takes its origin from the word, while the limbus minor, the terrestrial seed or sperm, takes it from the earth. The great limbus is the seed out of which all beings have come, and the little limbus is each ultimate being that reproduces its form, and that it has itself been produced by the great. The latter possesses all the qualifications of the great one, in the same sense as a son has an organization similar to that of his father. As Yolaster dissolved, Ares, the dividing, differentiating, and individualizing power, Fohat, another old friend, being to act, all projection took place in the consequence of separation. There were produced out of the eidos the elements of fire, water, air, and water, whose birth, however, did not take place in material mode or by simplistic separation, but by spiritual and dynamical, not even complex combinations, mechanical mixture, or opposed to chemical combination, just as fire may come out of a pebble or a tree out of a seed, although there is originally no fire in the pebble nor a tree in the seed. Spirit is living, and life is spirit, and life and spirit produce all things, but they're essentially one and not two. The elements, too, have each one its own Yolaster, because of all the activity of matter and even in every form is only an illusium of the same fount. But as from the seed grow the roots with their fibers, and after that the stalk, which with its branches and leaves, and lastly the flowers and seeds, likewise all beings were born from the elements and consist of elementary substances, out of which other forms may come into an existence, bearing the characteristics of their parents. This doctrine, preached 300 years ago, remarks the translator, is identical with the one that revolutionized modern thought after having put into new shape and elaborated by Darwin. It was still more elaborated by Kepler in the Psychia philosophy. The elements as the mother of the creatures are invisible, spiritual nature, and have souls. They all spring from the Mysterium Magnum, compared with the Vishnu Purana from the Pradhana, primordial substance, presided over by the embodied spirit. Proceeds the evolution of those qualities from the great principle Mahat, universal intellect or mind, proceeds the original of the subtle elements and from the organs of sense. This, it may be shown that all the fundamental truths of nature were universal in antiquity, and that the basic ideas upon spirit, matter, and the universe is upon God, substance, and man were identical, taking the two most ancient religious philosophies on the globe, Hinduism and Hermeticism, from the scriptures of India and Egypt. The identity of the two is easily recognizable. This becomes apparent to the one who reads the last translation and rendering of the Hermetic fragments, just mentioned by our late friend, Dr. Anne Kingsford. Disfigured and tortured as these have been in their passage through sectarian Greek and Christian hands, the translator had most ably and intuitively seized the weak points and tried to remedy them by means of explanation and footnotes. And she says, the creation of the visible world by the working gods, or Titans, as agents of the supreme God, is a thoroughly Hermetic idea, recognizable in all religious systems and in accordance with the modern science research, which shows us everywhere the divine power operating through natural forces. The universal being that consists all, and which is all, puts into motion the soul and the word and the world. All the nature comprises, says Hermes, in the manifold unity of universal life, the innumerable individualities distinguished by their variations are nonetheless united in such a manner that the whole is one and that everything proceeds from unity. God is not a mind, but the cause that the mind is, not a spirit, but the cause that the spirit is, not light, but the cause that the light is. The above shows plainly the divine primander, however much distorted in some passages by Christian soothing, was nevertheless written by a philosopher, while most of the so-called Hermetic fragments are the production of sectarian pagans with a tendency towards the anthropomorphic supreme being. Yet both are the echo of the esoteric philosophy in the Hindu Puranas. Compared to invocations on one to the Hermetic supreme all, the other to the supreme all of the latter Aryans, says a Hermetic fragment called by Sudas, the Virgin of the Word, I adjure thee, heaven, holy work of the great God, I adjure thee, voice of the Father, uttered in the beginning when the universal world was framed. I adjure thee by the Word, only Son of the Father, who upholds all things by favorable and be favorable. This is just preceded by the following. Thus the ideal light was before the ideal light, and the luminous intelligence of intelligence was always, and its unity was nothing else than the spirit enveloping the universe, out of whom is neither God nor angels nor any other essential form. It is the Lord of all things and the power of the light, and all depends on him, it, and he is in him, it. Fragments of the writings of Hermes to Ammon. This is contradicted by the very same Trismegistus, who is made to say, to speak of God is impossible, for corporeal cannot express the incorporeal. That which has not any body, nor appearance, nor form, nor matter, cannot be apprehended by sense. I understand tactios. I understand that which is impossible to define, that is God. Very interesting there. The contradiction between the two passages is evident, and this shows that Hermes was a generic nom de plume used by a series of generations of mystics of every shade, and that a great discernment has to be used before accepting a fragment of esoteric teaching only because it is undeniably ancient. Let us now compare the above with the like invocation of the Hindu scriptures, undoubtedly as old, if not far older. Here is the Parasaya, the Aryan Hermes, who instructs Maitreya, the Indian Asclepios, and called the Vishnu in his triple homeostasis. Glory to the unchangeable, holy, eternal, supreme Vishnu of one universal nature, the mighty over all, to him who is Puriyan Yargarbha, Hari and Sankraya, Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva, the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer of the world, to Buddhist Veda, the liberator of his worshippers, to him whose essence is both single and manifold, who is both suitable and corporeal, indiscrete and discrete, to Vishnu, the cause of final emancipation, the cause of the creation, existence, the end of the world, who is the root of the world and who consists of the world. This is the grand invocation full of philosophical, physiological meaning underlying it, but for the profane masses, as suggested as in the first of the anthropomorphic being, we must respect the feeling that the dictated both, but we cannot help finding it in full disharmony with its inner meaning, even with that which is found in the same Hermetic treatise, where it is said, reality is not upon the earth, my son, and it cannot be therefrom. Nothing on earth is real, there is only appearances. He, man, is not real, my son, as man. The real consists solely in itself and remains what it is. Man is transient, therefore he is not real. He is but appearance, and appearance is the supreme illusion. Theos. Then the celestial bodies themselves are not real, my father, since that also vary. Trismegistos. That which is subject to birth and change is not real. There is in them a certain falsity, seeing that they too are variable. Tatios. And what then is the primordial reality? Trismegistos. That which is one of alone, O Tatios. That which is not made of matter, nor in any body, which has neither color nor form, which changes nor is transmitted, but which always is. This is quite consistent with the Vedic teaching, the leading thought in occult, and many of the same passages in Hermetic fragments that belong bodily to the Secret Doctrine. The latter teaches that the whole universe is ruled by intelligent and semi-intelligent forces and powers, as stated from the very beginning. Christian theology admits that even enforces belief in such, makes an arbitrary division and refers to them as angels and devils. Science denies the existence of such and ridicules the very idea. Spiritualists believe in the spirits of the dead, and outside these deny entirely any kind of class of indivisible beings. The occultists and Kabbalists are thus the only rational expounders of the ancient traditions, which have now accumulated in dogmatic faith on the one hand and dogmatic denials on the other. For both belief and unbelief embrace but one small corner each of the infinite horizons of spiritual and physical manifestations, and thus both are right from their respective standpoints, and both are wrong in believing that they can circumscribe the whole within their own special and narrow barriers, for they can never do so. In the respect, science, theology, and even spiritualism show little more wisdom than the ostrich does when it hides in its head in the sand at its feet, feeling more sure that they can, but thus nothing beyond its point of observation and limited area occupied by foolish head. As the only works now extended upon the subject under consideration within reach of the profane and the Western civilized races are the above-mentioned Hermetic books, or rather Hermetic fragments, we may contrast them to the present case with the teachings of esoteric philosophy. To quote for this purpose from any other would be useless, since the public knows nothing of the Chaldean works which are translated into Arabic and preserved by the Sufi initiates. Therefore, the definitions of Asclepios, as lately compiled and glossed by Mrs. A. Kingsford, FTS, some of which says are in remarkable agreement with the esoteric Eastern doctrine, have to resort to for comparison. Though not a few passages show a strong impression of some later Christian hand, yet on the whole, the characteristic of the genii and gods are those of the Eastern teachings, while concerning other things, there are passages which differ widely in our doctrines. The following are a few. Extracts from private commentary, hereto secret. The eternal, as goodness sakes, guys, I'm sorry, it's in italics. The initial existence in the first twilight of the Maha Manvanta, after the Maha Pralaya that follows every age of Brahma, is a conscious spiritual quality. In the manifested world's solar system, it is in its objective subjectivity, like the film from a divine breath, to the gaze of the entranced seer. It spreads as it issues from Laya throughout infinity, a colorless spiritual fluid. It is on the seventh plane and its seventh state in our planetary world. It is a substance to our spiritual sight. It cannot be called so by men in their waking state. Therefore, they have named it in their ignorance God spirit. It exists everywhere and forms the first upadi, foundation on which our world solar system is built. Outside the latter, it is to be found in its pristine purely only between the solar system or the stars of the universe, the worlds already formed or forming, those in Laya resting meanwhile in its bosom. As its substance is of a different kind from the known on earth, the inhabitants of the latter, seeing through it, believe in their illusion and ignorance that it is empty space. There is not one finger's breadth, agula, of void space in the whole boundless universe. Matter or substance is sedentary within our world, as it is so beyond it. Moreover, each of its states or principles is graduated into 7 degrees of density. Surya, the sun, in its visible reflection, exhibits the first or lowest state of the 7th, the highest state of the universal presence, the pure of the pure, the first manifested breath of ever unmanifested sat, Venus. All the central physical or objective suns are in their substance, the lowest state of the first principle of the breath, nor any of these any more than the reflection of their primaries, which are concealed from the gaze of all the Daihan Kohans, whose corporeal substance belongs to the 5th division of the 7th principle of the mother substance, and is therefore 4 degrees higher than the solar reflected substance. As there are 7 day 2 principal substance in the human body, so there are 7 forces in man and all nature. The real substance of concealed sun is a nucleus of mother substance. It is the heart and matrix of all living and existing forces in our solar universe. It is the kernel from which proceed us to spread on their cyclic journeys all the powers that set in action the atoms in their functional duties, and the focus within which they agree meet in their 7th essence every 11th year. He who tells thee he has seen the sun, laugh at him, as if he had seen that sun moves really onward on his diurnal path. It is on account of his sedentary nature that the sun is spoken of by the ancients as one who is driven by 7 horses equal to the meters of the Vedas, or again, that though he is identified with the 7 Ganya classes of being in his orb, it is distinct from them, as he is indeed also that he has a 7th race. Indeed, he has. The 7 the 7 beings in the sun as the 7 holy ones, self-born from the inherent power in the matrix of mother substance. It is they who send the seven principal forces called rays, which at the beginning of Prahlaya will center into seven new suns for the next Manavatra, the energy from which they spring into conscious existence in every sun is what people call Vishnu, which is the breath of the absoluteness. We call it the one manifested life and itself reflected of the absolute. The latter must never be mentioned in words or speech, lest it should be take away from some of our spiritual energies that aspire towards it, state, gravitating ever onward into the spirituality as the whole physical universe gravitates towards its manifested center cosmically. The formal initial existence, which may be called, while this state of being, the one life, is the explained a film for creative or formative purposes, it manifests in seven states, which with septenary subdivisions are the 49 fires mentioned in sacred books. The first is a mother, prima materia, separating itself into primary seven states. It proceeds down cyclically when having consolidated itself in the last principle or gross matter. It revolves around itself and informs with the seven emanation of the last, the first and the lowest element, the serpent biting its own tail. In a hierarchy or order of being, the seventh emanation of her last principle is, in the mineral, the spark that lies latent in it, and called the evanescent being by the positive awakening, the negative, and so forth. In the planet, it is that vital and intelligent force which informs the seed and develops it into the blade of grass, or the root and sapling. It is the germ which becomes the upadi of the seven principles of the thing it resides in, shooting from out as the letter grows and develops. In every animal, it does the same. It is the life principle and vital power as instinct and qualities, its characteristics and special idiosyncrasies. To man, it gives all that it bestows on all the rest of the manifested units in nature, but develops furthermore the reflection of all its 49 fire in him. Each of his seven principles is an heir in full to a partaker of the seven principles of the Great Mother. The breath of her first is the spiritual Atma. Her second principle is Buddha, soul. We call it erroneously the seventh. The third furnishes him with the brain stuff of the physical plane and with the mind that moves it, which is the human soul, according to his organic capacities. It is the guiding force in the cosmic and terrestrial elements. It resides in the fire, provoked out of its latent and into an active being. For the whole of the seven subdivisions of the principle reside in the terrestrial fire. It whirls in the breeze, blows the hurricane, and sets the air in motion, but the element participates in one of the principles also, proceeding cyclically in its regulations. The motion of the water attracts and repels the waves according to the fixed laws of which its seventh principle is forming soul. It is four higher principles contain the germ that develops the cosmic gods. As these lower one breeds the lives of the elementals. In our solar world, the one existence is heaven and earth, the root and the flower, the action and the thought. It is in the sun and the present in the glowworm. Not an atom can escape it. Therefore, the ancient sages have wisely called it manifested God in nature. It may be interesting in the connection to remind the reader of what Mr. Sudha Rao said, the forces mystical define. See the 5 years of Theosophy and the 12 signs of the zodiac. Thus he says, quote, Kenya, the sixth sign of the zodiac, or Virgo, means a virgin and represents Sakti or Mahamaya, the sign in the sixth Rashi or division, and indicates that there are 6 primary forces in nature synthesized by 7. These Sanskrit stands as follows. Parasakti, literally the great supreme force of power. It means the means and includes the powers of light and heat. Guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher all of this. Jananskripti. See, sorry, can't do it. The power of intellect or real wisdom or knowledge. It has two aspects. The following of the same of its manifestation, when placed under the influence or control of material conditions, the power of mind is interpreting our sensations. Its power is recalling past ideas, memory, and raising future expectation. Its power is exhibited in what are called by modern psychologists the law of association, which resembles it to form persistent connections between various groups of sensations and possibilities of sensations, and thus generate the notion or idea of the external object. Its power is connecting our ideas together by various mysterious link of memory, thus generating the notion of self-individuality. Some of its manifestations, when liberated from the bonds of matter, are clairvoyance, psychometry. Damn. Sorry, guys. It's frustrating. Askati, the power of will, it most ordinarily manifestation is a generation of certain nerve currents which set in motion such muscles as required for the accomplishment of the desired object. Kriya Shakti, the mysterious power of thought which enables it to produce external, perceivable, phenomenal results by its own inherent energy. The ancients held that any idea will manifest itself eternally if one's attention is deeply concentrated upon it. Similarly, an intense volition will be followed by the desired result. A yogi generally performs his wonders by means of Shakti and Kurishakti. Kundalini Sakti, the power of force which moves in a curved path. It is a universal life principle manifesting everywhere in nature. The force includes the two great forces of attraction and repulsion. Electricity and magnetism are but manifestations of it. This is the power which brings about the continuous adjustment of internal relations to external relations, which is the essence of life according to Herbert Spencer, and that continuous adjustment of eternal relations to internal relations, which is the basis of transmutation of souls, Punarjaman, rebirth, in the doctrines of the ancient Hindu philosophers. A yogi must thoroughly subjugate this power before he can obtain moksham. Mantraki Sakti, the force of power of letters, speech, or music. The Matra Shatra has for its subject matter this force in all the manifestations. The influence of melody is one of its ordinary manifestations. The power of the infallible name is the crown of the Sakti. Modern science has but partly investigated the first, second, and fifth of the forces above named, but it altogether in the dark. As regards the remaining powers, the six forces are in their unity represented by the Davani Prakti, the seventh, the light of the Logos. The above is quoted to show the real Hindu ideas on the same. It is in all esoteric through not covering the 10th part of what might be said. For one, the six names of the six forces mentioned are those of the six hierarchies of Daihan Kohan synthesized by their primary, the seventh, who personified the fifth principle of the cosmic nature, or of the mother in its mystical sense. The enumeration alone of the yogi powers would require 10 volumes. Each of these forces have a living conscious entity as its head, of which entity in its emanation. But let us compare with the commentary just cited the words of Hermes, the thrice great. Quote, the creation of life by the sun is continuous as his light. Nothing arrests or limits it. Around him, like an army of satellites and innumerable choirs of genii, These dwell in the neighborhood of the immortals and thence watch over human things. They fulfill the will of the gods, karma, by means of storms, tempests, transitions of fire, and earthquakes, likewise by famines and wars for the punishment of impiety. It is the sun who preserves and nourishes all creatures, and even as the ideal world which environs this sensible word fills with the last will, the plenitude and the universal variety of forms, so also the sun enfolding all in his light accomplishes everywhere the birth and development of creatures. Under his own orders is the choir of genii, or rather the choirs, for there are many and diverse, and their number corresponds to that of the stars. Every star has its genii, good and evil by nature, or rather by their operation, for operation is the essence of the genii. All these genii preside over mundane affairs. They shake and overthrow the constitution of states and of individuals. They imprint their likeness on our soul. They are present in our nerves, our marrow, our veins, our arteries, and our very brain substance. At the moment when each of us receives life and being, he is taken in charge by the great genii, elementals who preside over births, and who are classed beneath the astral powers, superhuman and astral spirits. They change perpetually, not always identical, but revolving in the circles. They permeate by the body 2 parts of the soul, that it may receive from each the impress of his own energy. But the reasonable part of the soul is not subject to the genii. It is designed for the reciprocation of the God who enlightens it with a sunny ray. Those who are thus illumined are few in number, and from the genii abstain, from neither genii nor gods have any power in the presence of a single ray of God. But all other men, both soul and body, are directed by genii, to whom they cleave and whose operations they effect. The genii have then the control of mundane things, and our bodies serve them as instruments. The above said, save a few sectarian points, represents that which was a universal belief common to all nations till about a century or so back. It is still unorthodox in its broad outlines and features among pagans and Christians alike, if one accepts a handful of materialists and men of science. For whether one calls the genii of Hermes and his gods powers of darkness and angels, as in the Greek and Latin churches, or the spirits of the dead, as in spiritualism, or again, bhuts or devas, as they called, or the jinn, as they called in India and Muslim countries, they are all one and the same illusion. Let not this, however, be misunderstood in the sense into which the great philosophical doctrine of the Vedas have been lately perverted by the Western schools. All that which is emanates from the absolute, which from this qualification alone stands as the one and only reality. Hence, everything extraneous to this absolute, the generative causative element, must be an illusion and most undeniably. But this is only so from the purely metaphysical view. A man who regards himself as mentally sane and is so regarded by the neighbors, calls the visions of insane brother, whose hallucinations make the victim either happy or supremely wretched. As the case may be, illusions and fancies likewise. But where is the madman for whom the hideous shadows in his deranged mind, his illusions are not, for the time being, as actual and as real as the things which his physician or keeper may see? Everything is relative in the universe, everything is illusion, but the experience of any plane is an actuality for the percipient to begin, whose consciousness is on the plane. Though the said experience, regarded from purely metaphysical standpoint, may be conceived to have no objective reality, but it is not against metaphysicians, but against physicists and materialists that esoteric teaching has to fight. And for this vital force, light, sound, electricity, even the objectivity, pulling force of magnetism, has no objective being and are said to exist merely as modes of motion, sensations and affections of matter. Neither the occultists generally nor the theosophists reject as erroneously believed by some the views and theories of modern scientists, only because these views are opposed to theosophy. The first rule of our society is to render unto Caesar that is Caesar's. The Theosophists, therefore, are the first to recognize the intrinsic value of science, but when in its highest priest resolve consciousness into secretion from the gray matter of the brain and everything else in nature into a mode of motion, we protest against the doctrine as being unphilosophical, self-contradictory, and simply absurd from a scientific point of view, as much as even more that from the occult aspect of the esoteric knowledge. For truly the astral light of the derided Kabbalists have strange and weird secrets from him whom can see it, and the mysterious concealed within its incessantly disturbed waves are there, the whole body of materialists and scoffers, notwithstanding these secrets, along with many other mysteries, will remain non-existent in the materialists of our age in the same way as America was a non-existent myth for Europeans during the early part of the medieval ages, whereas Scandinavians and Norwegian had actually reached and settled in the very old New World several centuries before. But as Columbus was born to rediscover and force the old world to believe in anti-primordial countries, so will there be born scientists who discover the marvels now claimed by occultists to exist in the regions of ether, with their varied and multiform dozens and conscious entities. Then Wallen's science will have to accept old superstition as it has several others, and having been once forced to accept it, judging from past experience, its learned professors will, in all its probability, as in the case of mesmerism and magnetism, now rebaptize hypnotism, father the thing, and reject its name. The choice of the new appellation will depend in its turn on the modes of sorry guys, it's a lot of reading. The modes of motion, the new name for the older automatic physical process among the nerve fibrils of the scientific brain of Molshaghat, as also very likely upon the last meal and the manner of since, according to the founder of the new high-low idealistic scheme, celebration is generically the same as chrysalification. Thus, we're not just, my goodness, sorry guys. Thus, we're one to believe this preposterous position, the new name of the archaic thing would have to take its chance on the inspiration of the names livelier, and then only would these truths have chance of becoming scientific. This doesn't end. It's the book that doesn't end. But truth, however distasteful, is generally blind majorities, has always had her champion ready to die for her, and it is not the occultist who would protest against its adoption by science under whatever new name. But until absolute force on the notice and acceptance of science, many an occult truth will be taboo, as the phenomena of the spiritualists and other psychic manifestations were to be finally appropriated by its extraducers without the least acknowledging that or thanks. Nitrogen has added considerably to chemical knowledge, but it is discoverer Paracelsus is to this day called a quack. How profoundly true are the words H.T. Buckle in his admirable History of Civilization when he says, quote, owning to circumstances still unknown, there appear from time to time a great thinkers who devote their lives to a single purpose, are able to anticipate the progress of mankind and to produce a religion or a philosophy by which important effects are eventually brought about. But if we look into history, we shall clearly see that although the origin of a new opinion may be thus due to a single man, the result which the new opinions produce will depend upon the condition of the people among whom is propagated. If even a religion or philosophy is too much in advance of a nation, it can no present service, but must abide its time until the minds of men are ripe for its reception. Every science, every creed has had its martyrs. According to the ordinary course of affairs, a few generations pass away, and there comes a period when the very truths are looked upon as a commonplace facts, and a little later, there comes another period in which they are declared to be necessary, and even the dullest intellect wonders how could they have ever been denied. End quote. It is barely possible that the minds of the present generations are not quite ripe for the reception of occult truths. Such will be the retrospect furnished to the advanced thinkers of the sixth race of the history of the acceptance of esoteric philosophy, fully and unconditionally. Meanwhile, the generations of our fifth race will continue to be led away by prejudice and preconceptions. Occult science will have the finger of scorn pointed at them from every street corner, and everyone will seek to ridicule and crush them in the name and for the greater glory of materialism and its so-called science. The addendum, which completes the present book, shows, however, in its anticipatory answer to several of the forthcoming scientific objections to the truth and mutual position of the defendant and plaintiff, the Theosophists and the occultists stand arraigned by public opinion, which still holds high the banner of inductive science. The latter halves then to be examined and must be shown how far the achievement and discoveries in the realm of natural laws are opposed, not so much to our claims as to facts in nature. The hour has struck to ascertain whether the walls of the modern Jericho are so impregnable that no blast of the occult trumpet is ever likely to make them crumble. The so-called force with light and electricity headed them, and the constitution of the solar orb must be carefully examined, as also the gravitation and the nebular theories. The natures of ether and of our other elements must be discussed, thus contrasting scientific with other occult teachings, while revealing some of the hereto secret tenets of the latter. Some 15 years ago, the writer was the first to repeat, after the Kabbalists, the wise commandments in the esoteric catechism. Close thy mouth, lest thou shalt speak of this, the mystery in thy heart, lest thou shouldest think aloud, and if thy heart has escaped thee, bring it back to its place, for such is the object of our allegiance and our alliance. And again, this is a secret which gives death. Close thy mouth, lest thou shouldest reveal it to the vulgar. Compress thy brain, lest something should escape from it and fall outside. Rules of initiation. A few years later, a corner of the veil of Isis had to be lifted, and another form and a larger rent is made. But old and time-honored errors, such as become with every day more glaring and more self-evident, stand array in battle order, as they did then. Marshaled by blind conversation and conceit and prejudice, they are constantly on the watch, ready to strangle every truth, which, awakening from the age-long sleep, happens to knock for admission. Such has been the case ever since man became an animal. That this proves in every case mortal death. To the revealers who bring to the light any of these old truths, it is certain as that it gives life and regeneration to those who fit to profit even by the little that is now revealed to them. We have finished book 1, part 1. Next time, we're going to start the evolution of symbolism and its approximate order. Sorry, guys, for the utter frustration. That was very long. It's very dry in here. I don't have, obviously, I'm in a hotel, so I don't have a dehumidifier. So, yeah, I do apologize for that. I hope you enjoyed. Please don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. It helps me get this work out, and to have ears that have the ears to hear and the eyes to see, to listen to such profound works. Even if you're not a person that believes in any of this, it is great to have an opinion and a conception, perception, comprehension of what other people think. Sending each and every one of you love and light, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye, guys.